5. Cowboys mocked the obese girl at the saloon. The mountain man walked in and broke every single jaw. The year was 1793, and the frontier settlement of Crow's Bend existed as little more than a collection of weathered timber buildings huddled against the endless expanse of wilderness. Here, at the edge of civilization, the rules were simple. The strong survived, and the weak learned to disappear. For Martha Hendricks, disappearing had become an art form she practiced daily. At 23 years old, Martha carried her weight like an anchor she could never shed. Her frame was substantial, her movements careful and measured, as if she were constantly aware of the space she occupied in a world that seemed designed for smaller, more delicate creatures. The calico dress she wore had been let out so many times that the seams formed a road map of her shame, and the apron tied around her waist was indeed broad enough to draw comparisons she'd heard whispered behind cupped hands more times than she could count. She had arrived in Crow's Bend 6 months earlier, fleeing from Philadelphia, where her family's disgrace had made life unbearable. Her father, once a respected merchant, had died in debtor's prison. Her mother had followed him to the grave within a fortnight, broken by grief and poverty. Martha, left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination to survive, had traveled west on a merchant's wagon, enduring 3 weeks of pitying glances and barely concealed disgust from her fellow travelers. The Golden Spur Saloon was owned by Willem Jacobson, a gruff Dutchman with a glass eye and a surprisingly kind heart. He had hired Martha without asking too many questions, offering her a room in the back that was barely larger than a closet and wages that amounted to pennies. But it was work, it was shelter, and it was hers. She washed dishes from dawn until well past midnight, scrubbed floors until her knees ached, and emptied spittoons without complaint. She kept her head down, spoke only when spoken to, and tried to make herself as invisible as a woman of her size could possibly be. But invisibility was a luxury the frontier rarely afforded anyone, especially not someone like Martha. The 5 men who made her life a particular kind of hell were regulars at the Golden Spur. They called themselves Cowboys, though most of their time seemed to be spent drinking, gambling, and tormenting anyone weaker than themselves. Their leader, if such a sorry group could be said to have one, was Clem Bassett, a rail-thin man with yellowed teeth and a mean streak that ran deeper than any river. His companions were equally unpleasant. Wade Turner, who fancied himself a ladies' man despite his pockmarked face. Brothers Jacob and Josiah Reeves, both thick-necked and slow-witted, and Luther Pike, a nervous little ferret of a man who laughed at everything Clem said as if his life depended on it. They had started with glances and snickers. Then came the whispered comments just loud enough for Martha to hear. Within a month, they had grown bolder, their cruelty becoming public entertainment for the saloon's patrons. Most people looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. This was the frontier, after all, where minding your own business was the 11th commandment. On this particular November evening, the air inside the Golden Spur was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Martha moved between tables, collecting empty glasses and plates, her movements efficient despite her size. She had learned to navigate the crowded room with surprising grace, turning sideways to slip between chairs, timing her movements to avoid collisions. Clem and his gang occupied their usual corner table, already deep into their cups despite the early hour. Martha could feel their eyes on her as she worked, could hear the low murmur of their voices building toward something ugly. She tried to work faster, hoping to finish clearing the nearby tables before whatever storm was brewing could break. But hope was another luxury the frontier rarely provided. Well, 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 Clem's voice rang out across the saloon, silencing several nearby conversations. Look what we got here, boys, the walking mountain herself, gracing us with her presence. Martha's hands trembled as she stacked another plate. She kept her eyes down, refusing to take the bait. "Hey," Wade called out, his voice thick with whiskey. "We're talking to you, fat girl. Ain't you going to say hello to your admirers?" Laughter rippled through the corner, cruel and sharp. Martha felt her face burning, but she continued her work, moving toward the kitchen with her loaded tray. "Look at that apron!" Jacob Reeves hollered. "Could use that thing as a tent. Sleep a whole family under there." "Or a herd of cattle," his brother Josiah added, slapping the table with glee at his own wit. Martha's vision blurred with tears, but she kept moving. Just a few more steps to the kitchen. Just a few more steps to safety. Luther Pike's high-pitched giggle cut through the din. "Bet old Willem pays her in food. That's why she works so cheap. Gets to eat all the scraps like a hog at a trough." The comparison to a pig brought a fresh wave of laughter. Some of the other patrons joined in now, emboldened by the gang's brazenness. Martha felt the weight of their mockery like physical blows, each word a stone added to the burden she already carried. She was almost to the kitchen door when Clem's chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. "Where you going, girl? We ain't done talking to you." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. The dishes on her tray clattered dangerously, and Martha struggled to keep them balanced while trying to pull away from his grip. "Please," she whispered, the first word she'd spoken all evening. "Let me go." "Please," Clem mocked in a high falsetto. "Ain't that sweet? The sow can talk." He pulled her closer, his breath reeking of rot-gut whiskey. "You know what I think? I think you like the attention. I think you're just playing hard to get." Wade stood up now, emboldened by Clem's aggression. He moved to block Martha's path to the kitchen, his lips twisted in a leer. "Maybe she wants to sit with us. What do you say, boys? Should we make room for the lady?" "Gonna need a bigger bench," Jacob called out. "Gonna need a bigger saloon," Josiah added. The tray slipped from Martha's hands, crashing to the floor in an explosion of broken crockery and spilled food. The sudden noise brought a momentary silence, and in that silence, Martha's quiet sobs became audible to everyone in the room. Clem seized the moment, his cruelty reaching a new peak. He hooked a finger under her chin, forcing her head up so that her tear-stained face was visible to the entire saloon. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. That's better. Now, we're just having a little fun. No need for waterworks. Unless," he turned to his companions with a grin, "unless she's crying because she dropped her dinner." The laughter was deafening now, a wall of sound that seemed to press in on Martha from all sides. She wanted to run, but Clem's grip was iron, and Wade blocked her escape. She wanted to scream, but her voice had abandoned her. She wanted to disappear, to simply cease existing in this moment of pure humiliation. That's when the door opened. The cold November wind rushed in first, carrying with it the scent of pine needles and mountain snow. Then came the man, He had to duck to clear the doorframe, his massive shoulders nearly brushing both sides as he entered. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, perhaps more, built like the mountains themselves, broad, solid, and immovable. His coat was made from bear hide, the fur still thick and dark, giving him the appearance of some creature that had walked out of legend. Beneath the coat, he wore buckskin trousers and a simple homespun shirt. His boots were worn but well maintained, laced up past his ankles. But it was his face that commanded attention, weathered by wind and sun, marked by a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, framed by dark hair that hung past his shoulders. It was the face of a man who had seen things that would break lesser souls. His eyes, pale gray like a winter storm, swept across the saloon with the intensity of a hunting eagle. The laughter died. Conversation stuttered into silence. Even the piano player's fingers stilled on the keys. The mountain man's gaze found Martha, still held by Clem, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by broken dishes and spilled food. Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes, recognition of a scene he'd witnessed too many times before, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of injustice that demanded rectification. He didn't speak, didn't ask what had happened. The evidence was plain enough. His first step toward Clem's table made the floorboards groan. His second step cleared half the distance. By his third step, Clem had finally registered the danger and released Martha, shoving her aside as he backed toward his companions. "Now hold on," Clem stammered, his bravado evaporating like morning mist. "We was just having a little fun. Ain't no harm in—" The mountain man's fist moved with shocking speed for someone his size. It connected with Clem's jaw with a sound like a tree branch snapping. The cowboy's head whipped to the side at an unnatural angle, and he crumpled to the floor without another word, unconscious before he hit the ground. Wade reached for the pistol at his hip, but the mountain man was faster. His massive hand clamped around Wade's wrist, squeezing. The sharp crack of breaking bones echoed through the silent saloon, followed by Wade's high-pitched scream. Before the cowboy could draw another breath, a second punch caught him square in the face, silencing his screams and adding him to the growing collection of bodies on the floor. The Reeves brothers, showing more courage than sense, charged simultaneously. The mountain man caught Jacob's fist in mid-swing, twisted, and used the cowboy's own momentum to slam him face first into the table. The wood split with the impact, and Jacob slid to the floor, blood pouring from his shattered nose and jaw. Josiah lasted only slightly longer. He managed to land a punch on the mountain man's ribs, a blow that would have felled most men. The mountain man didn't even flinch. His counterpunch lifted Josiah off his feet and sent him flying backward into a support beam. The cowboy slumped to the ground, jaw hanging at an odd angle, eyes rolled back in his head. Luther Pike, the last one standing, had backed himself into a corner, hands raised in surrender. His face had gone the color of old parchment, and a dark stain spread across the front of his trousers. The mountain man advanced slowly, deliberately. He stopped directly in front of the terrified cowboy, looming over him like a mountain over a molehill. "Please," Luther whimpered, "please don't. I was just, they made me—" "Made you?" The mountain man's voice was deep and rough, like boulders grinding together. It was the first time he'd spoken since entering the saloon. "You got a mouth. I heard you use it to hurt someone who couldn't fight back." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Not to me." The mountain man's eyes flicked toward Martha, who stood frozen near the kitchen door, one hand pressed against her mouth. To her. Luther's eyes followed the gesture, and fresh tears streamed down his face. "I'm sorry, miss, I'm so sorry. We shouldn't have. I shouldn't have. Please forgive me." The mountain man's fist moved almost lazily, but it carried the force of judgment behind it. Luther's final cry was cut short as his jaw snapped, and he joined his companions in unconsciousness. The saloon remained utterly silent. Willem Jacobson stood behind his bar, glass eye gleaming in the firelight, making no move to intervene. The other patrons sat frozen, some with drinks halfway to their lips, all eyes on the mountain man who stood surrounded by broken bodies like some ancient god of vengeance. The mountain man turned away from the carnage and walked toward Martha. She pressed herself against the wall, unsure whether to fear this violence or be grateful for it. Her rescuer stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to speak quietly, but far enough to avoid crowding her. He bent down and retrieved the dishcloth she'd dropped when Clem first grabbed her. He held it out to her, waiting patiently until her trembling hand reached out to take it. "You hurt?" His voice was gentler now, though still rough as tree bark. Martha shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Good." He glanced around the saloon, his gaze touching on each patron in turn. The message was clear without words. This was not entertainment, and it would not be forgotten. Then his eyes returned to Martha. "This place ain't safe for you. Not tonight, maybe not ever. You got somewhere else to go?" Martha's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "This is where I work, where I live." The mountain man's jaw tightened. He looked toward Willem, who had been watching the entire exchange with an unreadable expression. "She's a good worker," Willem said, speaking for the first time. His Dutch accent made the word sound even more emphatic. "Never been late, never complained, does the work of two people. Those men," he gestured at the unconscious bodies, "they've been causing trouble for weeks. I should have thrown them out myself." "But you didn't." There was no accusation in the mountain man's tone, just statement of fact. Willem had the grace to look ashamed. "No, I didn't." The mountain man looked back at Martha. In the flickering firelight, his scarred face seemed almost gentle. "What's your name?" "Martha Hendricks." "I'm called Silas." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I got a cabin about 2 miles north of here, up in the foothills. Got an extra room that ain't being used. You want it, it's yours. No strings, no expectations, just a safe place." Martha's mind reeled. Accept shelter from a stranger, a man who had just broken 5 jaws with his bare hands? But what was the alternative? Stay here, where she'd been humiliated and tormented, where the next group of drunken cowboys might be even worse. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you help me?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if looking at something far away or long ago. "I knew someone once, someone kind, someone good. People hurt her because they could, because she was different, because she couldn't fight back. I wasn't there to help her." His eyes refocused on Martha. "I'm here now." There was a story there, Martha realized, buried deep beneath years of solitude and regret. A story that had shaped this man into something more than just a mountain hermit. Before Martha could respond, one of the other patrons, old Timothy Fletcher, who ran the general store, spoke up. Silas is good people, Miss Martha. Known him nigh on 15 years. He keeps to himself mostly, but his word's solid as granite." A murmur of agreement rippled through the saloon. Whatever fear the patrons had of Silas, it was tempered by respect. Willem cleared his throat. "Martha, you take the rest of the night off. Take tomorrow, too. Think about what you want to do. Your job'll be here if you want it, and I'll make sure," he looked meaningfully at the unconscious men, "that you ain't bothered no more." Martha's mind churned with thoughts and emotions too tangled to sort through. She looked at Silas, this violent, strange, oddly gentle giant who had appeared like an avenging angel. She looked at the broken men on the floor who had made her life miserable. She looked at Willem and the other patrons who had watched her torment without intervening until someone bigger and stronger had done it for them. "I need to think," she finally said. Would it be all right if I came by tomorrow? To see the cabin?" Something that might have been a smile ghosted across Silas's scarred face. "I'll be there." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. Without looking back, he addressed the entire saloon. "Anyone touches her again, you answer to me. Anyone makes her cry again, you answer to me. Anyone makes her feel small again." He finally turned, and his pale eyes were cold as a winter grave. "You answer to me. We clear?" The silence that followed was assent enough. Silas ducked through the doorway and disappeared into the November night. The saloon exploded into conversation the moment he was gone. People argued about what they'd seen, about how fast he'd moved, about whether the Bassett gang would come back for revenge. The general consensus was that they wouldn't dare. Willem started organizing people to drag the unconscious men out into the street, muttering in Dutch about the mess and the broken furniture. Martha barely heard any of it. She stood with the dishcloth clutched in her hands, staring at the door through which her unlikely savior had departed, wondering if she'd just been offered salvation or simply traded one form of dependence for another. That night, lying in her tiny room, Martha couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Clem's cruel face, heard the laughter of the crowd, felt the weight of their mockery pressing down on her. But she also saw Silas, standing like a mountain between her and harm, asking nothing in return for his protection. Why? The question haunted her. Men didn't help women like her out of kindness. In her experience, help always came with a price, with expectations, with the assumption that gratitude could be converted into something more tangible. But there had been nothing of that in Silas's eyes, only a quiet, sad recognition, as if he saw in her something that called to his own old wounds. The next morning, Martha woke with the sun and made her decision. Whatever Silas's motivations, whatever his past, he had offered her something no one else in Crow's Bend ever had, a chance to escape the daily humiliation that had become her life. Even if his offer came with complications, even if she found herself trading one problem for another, it had to be better than what she had now. She borrowed a horse from Willem. "Take all the time you need, Martha, I mean it," and followed the directions Silas had given. North, past the old mill, follow the creek until it forked, take the right path up into the foothills. The November morning was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed impossible to Martha, who had spent so many months staring at saloon floors. She found the cabin exactly where Silas had said it would be, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was larger than she'd expected, well built from thick logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney that spoke of permanence rather than temporary shelter. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear chickens clucking somewhere behind the main structure. Silas emerged from the barn as she approached, carrying an armload of firewood. In the daylight, without the dramatic entrance and the violence, he seemed somehow more human. Still massive, still intimidating in his sheer physical presence, but there was a gentleness in how he set down the wood, in how he waited for her to dismount before approaching. "Wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," Martha admitted. "All night I kept asking myself why. Why would you help someone like me?" "Someone like you?" Silas's scarred eyebrow rose. "You mean someone who works hard, minds their own business, and don't deserve to be treated like dirt?" "Someone who—" Martha gestured at herself, all her insecurities laid bare in that single motion. "Someone who looks like this." Silas was quiet for a moment, then gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. Got coffee on, and I'll show you the extra room. Then I'll answer your question, if you still want to hear it." The cabin's interior was surprisingly neat. Simple furniture, well-made and well-maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and shelves lined another, filled with books that shocked Martha with their presence. Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, volumes on natural philosophy and medicine. Not what she'd expected from a mountain hermit. "You read?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Used to be a school teacher," Silas said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "Long time ago, different life." He led her to a door on the far side of the main room. "This was built for—" He paused, his face clouding with old pain. "For someone who never got to use it. It's yours if you want it." The room was small but clean, with a real bed, a chest for storage, and a window that looked out over the forest. Compared to her closet at the Golden Spur, it might as well have been a palace. Martha turned back to Silas, who stood in the doorway, his massive frame nearly filling it. "You said you knew someone who got hurt." Silas nodded slowly, then moved back into the main room, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. Martha followed, sitting across from him, the coffee warming her hands. "Her name was Sarah," Silas began, his voice soft with memory. "My sister. Younger than me by 3 years. She was born different, simple-minded, folks called it. Sweet as summer rain, never had a mean thought about anyone. But people saw her difference, and they were cruel." He stared into his coffee cup, seeing the past reflected there. "I was away at university in Boston studying to be a teacher. Got word that Sarah had died. They said it was an accident, that she'd fallen in the river and drowned. But when I came home," his jaw clenched, "I found out the truth. Group of men from town had been tormenting her for weeks. She'd gone to the river to hide from them, and they'd followed. They said they were just funning with her, that they didn't mean for her to panic and fall in." Martha felt her heart constrict with sympathy and recognition. "I'm so sorry." "I wanted to kill them," Silas continued. "Wanted it so bad I could taste it. But I didn't. Instead, I testified against them. Used my education, my understanding of the law to see them punished. And you know what happened? They got 3 months in jail. 3 months for tormenting a girl until she died trying to escape them." He looked up at Martha then, and she saw the depths of his pain, old but never healed. "That's when I knew civilization was a lie. All those books, all that learning, all those fine words about justice and equality, They don't mean nothing when it comes down to it. Strong prey on the weak, the different, the vulnerable, and the law protects the strong. So you left? Martha said quietly. Came west, came here, built this cabin, thought I'd leave it all behind. But you can't outrun what you know to be true. I see Sarah in every person who gets tormented for being different. Last night, when I walked in that saloon and saw you, he shook his head. Couldn't walk away. Not again. Not ever again. They sat in silence for a long moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Martha understood now. Silas wasn't saving her. He was saving his sister over and over, trying to rewrite an ending he'd never been able to change. What happened to those men? Martha finally asked. The ones who died, Silas said flatly. All 5 of them, within a year of their release. Different ways, one in a bar fight, 2 in a hunting accident, 1 fell off his horse drunk, 1 just disappeared into the woods and never came back. He met Martha's eyes. I didn't touch them. Didn't have to. The frontier has a way of balancing scales that civilization ignores. Martha should have been frightened by the cold certainty in his voice. Instead, she felt something else, a recognition of the harsh justice that governed this wild land. She thought of Clem and his gang, of the laughter and the cruelty, of how many others they'd probably tormented before her. I'll stay, she said, if the offer's still open. Silas nodded. It's open. No rent, no expectations. You want to keep working at the saloon, that's your choice. You want to work here, I could use help with the chickens and the garden, and I'm a terrible cook, that's your choice too. You want to just rest and heal, that's also your choice. Whatever you need, whatever you choose, you're safe here. And she was. Over the following weeks, Martha discovered a peace she'd never known. Silas kept his word about expectations. He treated her with a respectful distance, never crowding her, never making her feel uncomfortable. They fell into an easy routine. She took over the cooking in the garden, tended the chickens, and slowly began to reclaim a sense of self that had been beaten down by years of mockery and shame. She learned that Silas was a man of surprising depth. He read poetry by firelight, quoted Greek philosophy while chopping wood, and had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. He hunted and trapped, traded furs in town, and had skills that came from years of living close to the land. He taught her to track animals, to read weather signs in the clouds, to move quietly through the forest. And slowly, carefully, Martha began to heal. In town, the story of the mountain man's vengeance had become legend. The Bassett gang had left Crow's Bend the day they recovered consciousness, never to return. Other troublemakers found themselves on the receiving end of warnings from Willem and other business owners. Remember what happened to Clem's bunch. Silas is watching. Martha still went to town occasionally, helping Willem during busy nights at the saloon. But now she walked with her head up, no longer trying to disappear. The change wasn't just about Silas's protection, though. That helped. It was something deeper, something that had begun to grow in the quiet safety of the cabin in the foothills. She was learning that her worth wasn't determined by others' cruelty. That being different didn't mean being less. That she deserved kindness, respect, and safety not because someone stronger had decided to protect her, but because she was human, and those things should be every human's birthright. One evening, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Martha asked the question that had been growing in her mind for weeks. Do you think you'll ever go back? To teaching? To civilization? Silas considered this, his scarred face thoughtful in the fading light. I've been thinking about that. Used to be I came out here because I wanted to escape. But maybe, he glanced at her, maybe the point isn't to escape. Maybe it's to build something better right here. A place where people like Sarah, people like you, don't have to be afraid. Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of shame or pain. They were tears of possibility, of hope for a future she'd never dared imagine. That sounds like a good purpose, she said softly. Silas nodded. It does, doesn't it? As winter settled over the frontier, the cabin in the foothills became more than just a shelter. It became a symbol whispered about in Crow's Bend and the surrounding settlements. The mountain man and the girl he'd saved, the place where the broken could find refuge, the proof that even in the harsh wilderness, kindness could take root and grow. And Martha Hendricks, who had once tried so hard to disappear, found herself finally, truly seen, not for her appearance or her difference, but for who she was, a survivor, a friend, and a woman who had learned that sometimes salvation comes not from changing yourself, but from finding someone who helps you remember your own worth. The frontier was still harsh. Winter snows would come and test them both. But in the warm cabin, with books lining the walls and the smell of fresh bread filling the air, Martha and Silas had found something rare and precious, a chosen family, built not on blood or obligation, but on shared understanding that the strong should protect the weak, not because the weak are lesser, but because that's what humanity should mean. And in the Golden Spur Saloon, when new troublemakers rolled into town looking for easy targets, they were quickly educated about the mountain man who watched over Crow's Bend. Most took the hint and moved on. The few who didn't learned the same lesson Clem's gang had learned. Some lessons, it seemed, needed to be taught with broken jaws. But Martha rarely heard about such incidents anymore. She had found her mountain, her refuge, her home, and in doing so, she had found herself.